Good afternoon. Welcome. It is the July. Oh, I've forgotten the date. Classic start. It is the July 23rd edition of THCB Gang. I'm Matthew Holt, your host. Oh, I've forgotten the date. I'm looking forward to the chat today. It's going to be really fun. I have a really great group on with me today. So I'm going to tell you who they are. Hopefully, it should be you should be able to see this in the screen share, the PowerPoint. We have regulars: Grace Cordavano, CEO at Enlightening Results, patient advocate extraordinaire at Grace Cordavano on Twitter. Deven McGraw, another regular, although I haven't had Deven on for a while, the Chief Regulatory Officer at Citizen. As I used to joke about Deven, used to be terrible government bureaucrat, now trusting, wonderful entrepreneur at Citizen, at Health Privacy. Ian Morrison, my old friend and colleague from Institute for the Future at SecCurve, and a special guest today, one of my favorite people, great speakers and real fun to have around, Robin Farmanfarmaian. I got her close to her name correct. She's a patient entrepreneur, speaker, author of 2 and coming out with 3 books, runs about 5 companies and does all kinds of stuff. So here we go. We're all on. So let's join up the gang, and we are now streaming live. Hopefully, if someone can check, I didn't screw it up, because Zoya Khan, my person who usually runs the show, the producer, is away today, and I'm hoping that someone can tell me it's actually on THCB where I left it, but we are ready to go. Okay, welcome everyone. Great to see all of you. Really looking forward to today's conversation. And as was pointed out to me earlier on by Robin, we have not only we're majority female today, which is about time too, but also totally blonde. Although Ian and I may not be pulling our own, pulling our weight in the hair category as much as we
right.
All right. So let's kick off. Let's go around. And Ian, as you're the other token male here, I'll start with you. Over the last week or couple of weeks, what has come to your attention?
Oh man, there's so much. Well, obviously the cases and the hot spots. I was just listening to ground rounds at UCSF, and they were having people from Houston, Atlanta, Florida, talking about the uptick. So that's been, agonizing to watch. I think the other big story probably is the promising story on vaccines, although I'm no expert on that, but also the ugly reality that we may get a vaccine and nobody will take it, which might be the punchline for all of this. And then the other big story, I think, is the running out of unemployment money, and whether that gets renewed by Congress, because that has a big implication on the level of desperation for people getting out and about.
Absolutely. And I think that last one is going to come up a lot as you think about the rebound of the economy and how that impacts the healthcare system. Grace, what have you noticed in the last week or so?
So we're seeing that in New Jersey, where I'm from, it's the only state in the US to have COVID-19 cases drop for the second week in a row, which is promising. Wear your masks, wash your hands, socially distance, avoid crowds, all that stuff. And don't get tired and don't give up. And we're also seeing now, with the discussions of returning to school safely, the discussion on forming micro schools and learning pods for parents that need to go back to work, who want their children to go back, but all feel that the public school safety system has failed them and they need to reverse engineer here. Yeah,
interesting. Robin, we're going to come to you and I'll introduce you a bit more in a second, but just in the last week or two, generally in healthcare and health technology, what have you noticed?
I've noticed that some of these research studies have really been ramping up. One going on at Stanford that hooks into any of the wearable tech devices from Apple Watch to the Fitbit to really start to track before people get COVID. And so it can be that early warning system, kind of letting you know that there's a problem before you actually start to exhibit symptoms. And so Fitbit is running their own trial with Pfizer and BMS. There's another trial going on with Apple, and I believe they have one, of course, with Johnson & Johnson already around the EKG monitoring, but they have also launched COVID research studies using the watch. So if you're out there and you have a wearable tech device, you can totally join these now.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people actually sort of getting involved in that, and I basically think I should do that myself. There's also on the testing side, I need to figure this out. I've been offered some home testing with seropositivity. Perhaps we can talk about that in a second. Deven, what have you been up to and noticing the last few weeks?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One you may have talked about before, which now it just totally slipped my mind. Let me go to the second one. It's COVID brain.
The COVID brain, we've all got it. I can't remember the date, the day, the year, the
COVID
month.
brain, man.
Okay.
It's really awful.
We will be administering a psychological dementia test at the end of this one. You're going to recognize, is this an elephant?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is the dip in use of telehealth after, sort of seeing it go skyrocketing at the very beginning of the pandemic, and people sort of excited. This is telehealth's moment, now sort of fading, and trying to sort of get under what's behind that statistic. And then similarly, the diversion of data on COVID from being reported to and from the CDC to HHS with the use of a private contractor. So those are the two things.
Two radical, big changes there, and I think including the telehealth side. What's going to happen when the pandemic is officially over and whether the payments continue or not. But they've been going down. We've had this talked about actually. Raj Agarwal from Jefferson was talking about his clinic, filling up with human beings rather than TV screens or TV. Even a few weeks ago, it's been happening.
Right. I mean, the payments are still there, so why are we seeing these dips?
Right.
Like, the payments haven't gone away.
Well, we can talk about. I think we should dig into that a little bit. One thing I have noticed, which came out yesterday, which is I thought quite remarkable. I was perusing the stock market because that apparently has now replaced professional sports. Although there was a Chelsea game on yesterday, so I was doing both. But fortunately we lost. But and I noticed that one of the firms that had the biggest jump in the stock valuation yesterday was a car dealership. And I was going, how the hell would a car dealership, have its stock jump dramatically, and in fact be back above where it was before the start of the recession? And of course, that was blowing my mind because that doesn't make a lot of sense given what we know about retail and sales. And the other company which had a great pop yesterday was HCA. More than $1 billion in profit for the quarter, which is a stunningly good quarter by any means. And apparently it looks like, and I didn't dig in as much as some other people did, but it looks like that there was about $500 million in CARES Act money for HCA from the government, which they basically booked as pure profit. So, I think it's one of the things that's going to come out here, and there's been a similar, although he doesn't like to call it a blacklist, Brian Dolan, who writes the Exits and Outcomes newsletter, who used to write Moby Health News. He created a database looking, basically a sub-database of the data of all the companies that had PPP money for more than 150,000. I don't know if Citizen was on there, Deven, but there are a lot of digital health tech companies who've raised a lot of money who are on that list. And I guess the big question is, are they going to end up paying it back or not? Are they going to try and keep it and be forgiven? But I think we're not yet done with not only, as Ian raised, what happens with the rest of the economy and the stock market going forward, especially if unemployment starts ending and kind of we're done with the PPP money, and is there going to be another stimulus or bill in the next few weeks before, in fact, this week, right? Before the Congress, the Senate goes. That's one issue, and then figure out what happened to all that money that got spent and where did it all go. Going to be a lot of controversy about that. So I think we have a lot to talk about, and I think healthcare is continuing to be the story of the country in many different ways. But let's Robin, let's ask you to talk a bit about yourself. I know you wrote the book and did a lot of speaking, a couple of times at Health 2.0 here, Japan, elsewhere. When you wrote the book, The Patient is the CEO, and that was mostly about your experiences as a patient. So say a little bit about that, and then let's talk a little bit about since then you've been kind of the queen of helping people build their own personality, careers, entrepreneurship, meanwhile running about 5 companies in the background. So talk a little bit about your patient experience. I know we don't have you on. I was at one point thinking you were actually going to be taking an IV during this meeting, but that got postponed. But tell a little about your patient experience. Give people a background in that because it's really quite fascinating.
Sure. So yeah, The Patient as CEO is my first book, and it's about both taking control of your own health as the CEO, but also all the different technologies that are really helping allow that to happen, from sensors to 3D printing to telemedicine, of course, and point of care diagnostics. Now, it's all based on my background. At the age of 16, I was misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disease. By 19, I had taken out my entire large intestine. And by 26, I'd had over 40 hospitalizations, 6 major surgeries, 3 organs removed. And I was on 80 milligrams a day of methadone. And at that point, I went back to my doctor and I said, you know, everyone's been telling me I'm cured because they took out my large intestine, but yeah, I'm in extreme pain. I'm like, the methadone doesn't work. I want to be off this drug. It's horrible. And they said, well, next step could be to surgically implant a morphine pump into your spine. I was like, no. I was essentially a shut-in at that point for about 2 years. The hardest thing I could do is maybe take a shower. And so I went home that night and I fired my entire healthcare team. Started taking myself off the methadone. So I went through pretty severe opioid withdrawal for about a week by myself. And then I rebuilt my team. And I ended up getting diagnosed correctly with Crohn's disease, put on an IV biologic called Remicade, which is what I was going to get today. And I went into remission overnight. So that's why, I mean, it's
Right.
not only saved my life, but it gave me back my life. And now I'm a, you know, crazy serial entrepreneur in pharma, med device, and IT. I've worked on over 25 early stage companies, everything from curing cancer, sleep apnea, inhaled insulin. And now I'm working on virtual reality for stroke and brain injury, in addition to a few other things like clearing senescent cells.
All right, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So let's step back to the patient world for a second, because you've taught probably as much of anybody I can think of in different countries and different places about your patient experience, and met an enormous amount of patient groups, and talked to a lot of people. What do you think has been the impact? And Grace, I'd love for you to comment on this as well. What's been the impact of the group? And you're one of a number. I mean, you're obviously outstanding, but you're also one of a number of patients who've been, you know, aggressively out there discussing their experience, talking about how to interact differently with the healthcare system. There's obviously a number of organizations doing this as well. What do you think has been the impact of what you've done, what other patients like you have done on people you've met, and more broadly on the healthcare system? Do you think, I mean, how much are you encouraging other people to really take over the CEO-ship, as it were, of their own life as a patient?
It's been huge. Not only the feedback that I get from other patients who find me at conferences or send me notes saying things like, I channeled you, Robin, when I was in my doctor's appointment and I took control, right? Not only that, but I've now given talks in 14 countries and places like Japan. I got a lot of press in Japan, you know, with the Health 2.0 stuff. Their mouths drop open. Same thing in Germany. This is such a paternalistic healthcare system in those types of countries that it's just shocking to give them this viewpoint of, you know what, the doctor's not in charge, you are, you hire the doctor, quote unquote, whoever pays for it, but it's your responsibility to take control of your own healthcare and then actually engage and do things about it. No one's going to take care of you.
Grace, that's a leader for you. You're a leader in this as well. How are we doing on this sort of patient advocacy, patient taking charge front?
No, it's funny because what you call patient advocacy and the story that Robin is describing, which is earth shattering. But once someone hears that, you realize what we're talking about is a life skill that no one's bothered to teach us because it's not woven into the fabric of our education or our healthcare or anywhere. So when you learn this life skill and you see it, you teach it, and then now you can share that life skill with somebody else. Every patient and family that I've worked with, eventually, one of the best calls that I get is that they say, you know what, I knew someone that was going through this, and because we worked together, I was able to guide them. So you know what, you cause a domino effect. And Susanna Fox talks about peer health support and the power of it, of being that candle in the darkness for someone. And that's really what it is. And then once you realize too, that now you can network, you can then collectively push back and hack the system. We're always looking for a good hack as professionals, a shortcut. Who can you rub elbows with? We have LinkedIn, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, and all these social media platforms. But where's the professional platform for patients? So that's where we see this phenomenon where people are using social media to hack the system and share best practices, and almost like a guide and cliff notes and like a ways for healthcare where no one else has been there. And I think it's a good thing to do, because you know what, now this is amplifying thanks to social media, thanks to coverage from reporters and from shows and blogs. And I think once people see that this is possible, they want in too, because it feels good, feels safe.
All right. So now let me ask Devin and Ian. I mean, now I get cynical. You see these great advocates and people, developing the life skill, as Grace talked about, and then the rubber hits the road with the real healthcare system. Devin, you've been looking for a long time to help people get their data, and I know you've been tracking this. Where are we?
Yeah, so I was going to say, don't look for cynicism and downers from me, because obviously, our company, which is trying to help people gather all their health information so that they have it and they can be the CEO of their own healthcare, because when you don't have that data, it's really hard for you to go out and seek what it is that you need and you want. And HIPAA has given us the right to that data for a really long time, and yet it is historically and still often is too hard for patients to do that. They get turned away at many turns. The obstacles can be pretty high. And obviously we're, as a country, trying to move toward more seamless digital access through apps, through FHIR APIs, but it's going to take us some time to sort of get to that point where these apps are widely available. They can get you all of your health information as opposed to just some parts of your health information and not all of what you're entitled to. So we're counting actually on patients feeling more empowered by this data, but I think we also appreciate that just having your data doesn't necessarily give you the chutzpah to like go out and use it and feel like you can confront what can sometimes feel like a very powerful medical establishment with your own views. And I just love hearing your story, Robin. It reminds me of reading David Feigenbaum's book, although different because he's a medical professional who had to figure out what was going on with him and find his own cure. You are not. You overcame so many more obstacles to say, you know what, this is not working for me. You're all fired. I'm going to figure this out and move forward. So kudos. And we're building Citizen for people like you, for people that Grace talks to, and we need more people to sort of appreciate that. You know what? Get your health data, even if you really like the doctors you've got and feel like you're on the right path. You want to have that in case you've got to switch gears. So.
Ian, maybe, I don't know if you're going to be cynical or not, but you've been looking at the system for a long time, even longer than me. This movement of patients being, we've talked about shared decision-making, participatory medicine over the years. Is it, and yet we have our big established healthcare system. What do you think the impact has been so far, and where do you think it's going in terms of the types of things that we're talking about here from Grace and Robin?
Well, let me just support and cheer on the activity of empowering patients to get things right. I think that's a very important movement, and certainly, my wife is a former emergency room nurse. One of the things she does as a sort of assist to friends is be kind of a patient advocate for people with complex cases, and I think it's incredibly important, and translating that into tools that people can actually use and advice, and Grace has talked about this before, I think is incredibly important. Let me say a couple of things though about perhaps institutional allies in this that you might look to. And one of the things I've been concerned about over the last 40 years is that the measurement police in healthcare, the quality police as I call them, have done a very poor job of the one key thing that's important in healthcare is getting the right diagnosis. Robin, the tragedy of your experience, early experience, is that you got the wrong advice right at the very beginning. And what I mean by institutional allies is that I think the patient advocacy movement should be pushing the quality police to get better metrics and oversight of diagnostic accuracy. I mean, there have been some attempts. Leaders at Mayo, I remember having this conversation with back in the day, because they would pride themselves that they get it right at Mayo more often than other places. And certainly that's been my family's experience. But I think that's an institutional ally potentially. The other one I'd point to is, as Matthew knows, I've done a lot of work over the years with the Pacific Business Group on health and the employers. And if you look at what their kind of key strategy has been, and may continue to be amplified, is this whole center of excellence piece. Well, Walmart and others, PBGH Lowe's in cooperation with a number of different companies for elective surgeries like cardiovascular and low back pain treatment. The essence of that was not a group purchasing deal to get a cheaper price. It was putting in place a bundled payment with a requirement for a test of appropriateness, right? And they found that 20 to 50% of cases were deemed inappropriate, which really speaks to this problem of diagnostic accuracy. So I would sort of not only encourage what you're doing, but also urge to reach out for institutional allies in this, who are engaged in monitoring and paying for, the big game.
So I have a comment about the appropriateness. Test of appropriateness from which angle? From who?
Well,
because I have doctors, I'll give you some context. So working with patients in the oncology space, the oncologists, the medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, surgical oncologists will recommend gold standard, evidence-based standard of care, procedures, treatments, therapies, and they are repeatedly, routinely denied by the payers. It's to the point where sometimes patients don't get the care at all, and the doctors need to be calling until there's mounds of paperwork, or the patients need to appeal 1, 2, 3, 4 times, or completely start over, or just give up.
Right. No, and that's a fair point. I mean, it's in the structural interest of health plans to deny, right? I mean, that we know. I think that's why harnessing it because I think genuinely groups like employers are concerned about getting the right treatment for their members. And so that's why I think finding new allies in this, but you're absolutely right. That the bottom line should always be that the patient, it's a shared decision, right? And the patient has the final call in all of this. But
I'd also wonder, and I know, Grace, you were on with Shannon Brownlee a couple of weeks ago on the gang, and the same sort of conversation came up because Shannon wrote a book called Overtreated, which is a basic same thing. Half of what we do is unnecessary. Seems to me a lot of the unnecessary stuff is around two areas. One is kind of that path Robin's going down, which is misdiagnosis. You need one treatment worked, but the thing they wanted to do with you, they just got it wrong, and they pile activity on top of activity. If they got it right in the first place, it would have been different. And the other one is borderline stuff where it's much more profitable to do the surgery than to try another more conservative approach. And that probably, oncology is a very difficult one, but I know there's the gold standard, and there's a lot of this discussion about what that is. But I mean, people always come up with back surgery and lower back surgery, which happens all the time. And yet if you did physical therapy, and in fact, there's a couple of companies now who are sort of trying to take this on the road, as it were. Amada Health bought a company called Physera the other day. It's a company called Kaya, which is the same sort of thing, which is basically remote physical therapy, and trying to get people to start there rather than, if you have lower back pain, then to end up immediately heading off for surgery. And even Grand Rounds, which kind of does this kind of navigation stuff for employers behind the scenes, has found that a lot, I don't know if the numbers are, in my head are accurate, but roughly half of the savings they made for their employers were based on getting people, instead of going straight to back surgery, getting them to go to the physical therapy, intensive physical therapy first. So I'm wondering, I wonder if there are pockets of unnecessary stuff versus it's just everything, the 50% or 30% of everything's unnecessary. But I would say, and I've said this a number of times on the gang, the way for us to get rid of the unnecessary stuff by either improving the diagnosis or getting to the more conservative treatment first or whatever, was not just to have people too scared to leave their home because of COVID and just have it fall by 50% and put a bunch of doctors and hospitals in some of them, not HCA, but in financial hell because of that. So there's a lot of discussion about this over the years about what's unnecessary, but I don't know if we've ever really figured it out on a micro basis. Maybe you know more than I do.
Well, there's of course a lot of factors, but one thing we don't normally talk about that I try and teach a lot of other patients is that doctors are only taught their specialty. And then they're only kept up to date, in their specialty and what their hospital tells them. For instance, I now get Remicade in the home, and I switched it from the hospital infusion clinic to my in-home using a full service pharmacy 5 years ago. This has been available through Walgreens for a long time. None of my doctors ever told me, even when I was fighting with my insurance company because the hospital I was using was charging $28,000 8 times a year for my medication. Moving it into the home, it costs $2,500 per medication dose, same exact medication, less than 1/10 of the cost. But my doctors there didn't even know you could do that.
Well, and the hospital are good interest in stopping them doing that because
Right. No, they want
Right.
their infusion patients. But the other thing is that surgeons know surgery. They don't know any other treatments of things. Like surgeons always will think surgery is the best option because they know how to do it and they've seen the successful results. They're just not even taught some of the other stuff, right? And so you got to think about that with every specialty, whether it's an oncologist or a radiologist or, a GI doctor. They know their stuff, but not all of medicine as a whole. And patients go to doctors thinking they're omniscient. Like, oh, you're a general practitioner, so you must know everything. What's this? I don't know,
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing issue, and as I think Ian said, the institutional ally that could be, NCQA and other groups looking at quality is that sort of the part of that it could be an area to get involved with. Part of the problem that I saw in the early days of Health 2.0, not the problem, was that a lot of the activity is down in that long tail of people who haven't got well diagnosed, and it's still the case. You look at things like some really big disease categories, quote unquote, like IBD and IBS, fibromyalgia. A lot of this stuff, which is referred to as, is it mental health, is it physical health, is it a combination of both? A lot of that stuff we still don't know a lot about, and they are areas where you see a lot of patient activism because, again, there's not that much understanding. And I think we do have to recognize that although we've built up this idea of the doctor as God and omniscient, and yes, it's been challenged certainly in this country over the last few decades, but it's only been a few decades compared to sort of 10,000 years of history of the shaman, the witch doctor, the bar shop surgeon, whoever doing that thing, being that character. Even though we've built that up, we don't know. We don't know that much about medicine and healthcare. There's still huge areas we know little about. Obviously, we're learning very fast, but there are many, many areas where we are doing sort of shot in the dark. And I think, Grace, cancer tends to be a lot of the issues with cancer oncology is that there's a huge amount of experimentation because we're not really sure what works in many of these cases. There are cases that we do know what works in. There are gold standard treatments, but there are also others. So I think it's a complex problem. We're not going to solve it in the next 32 minutes, but it's a great one we haven't really discussed well here. Can I flip? Please take it anywhere where you want. But I want to flip a little bit to Robin. Some of the things you talked about. You ran off a long list of technologies, right? That
I am crazy. Yes.
Craziness is good in certain capacities. We will send you the test to see if you can identify an elephant and count back from 100 by sevens. Funnily enough, we don't actually have a requirement on the show that you pass a dementia test. I don't know if that's something we should. Not sure if I could qualify to be on the show if that was the case, but maybe the new requirement to become in the Oval Office. Anyway, it boggles the mind. Anyway, but you mentioned you ran up a whole lot of technologies that you've been working on. You are pushing the boundaries. Partly, I think, because you're fascinated by that stuff, and partly because there are issues that you've got that, yes, you have a drug that keeps you in stasis at the moment, but there isn't a cure, right, for what you have. So tell me a little bit about what you think some of the more interesting technologies are that you're seeing and you're working on at the moment. And then let's have a conversation about how that fits in a system that is at the moment trying to figure out where it goes.
So the most relevant one for right now and what's going on right now is Mind Maze. So I've been an advisor to the founder now for about 3.5 years. It's a unicorn based in Switzerland. And what they are doing is they're using virtual reality for things like stroke and brain injury rehabilitation. And in fact, they are indicated for use in 9 neuro indications, including things like aging and pain and dementia. So what they've done, they've been in 20 countries and they're just coming into the United States. So they launched about a month ago in the US out of Johns Hopkins. The way it works, this is really cool. Because it is virtual reality, it can be done remotely. So this is Tele-Rehabilitation. They send the equipment to the patient, and what you do is a software package. So just like a cable box, you get the hardware for free, and you pay by the software package. Imagine you have a stroke patient with their left arm partially paralyzed. Well, the system you put on the virtual reality, and we give you a mirror image of your right arm over, say, your left arm. So that means in virtual reality, when you move your right arm, it looks to your brain like you are moving your left arm as well. And that's enough to trick the brain to dramatically increase efficacy and patient outcomes. So not only patients are actually able to do it because they can do it from home, it doesn't need a physical therapist to actually set up, which is huge. There's no one-on-one with a healthcare professional, but it's fun because you're not just in virtual reality, like doing something like flying a plane, you actually are the plane. And so we are essentially playing a video game while rehabilitating your stroke or your brain injury.
That's fascinating. I've seen a bunch of this. Is that on the Oculus Rift, or is it on?
No, they very strictly made their own hardware. So they have their own hardware platform. They are device agnostic, so you could use it on other high-end virtual reality systems, but they went clinical grade all the way. They were the first ones to market, and their VR equipment is all clinical grade.
Yeah, because I've seen a game called Supernatural. Have you seen this one, which is an exercise game you can play on the Oculus? I've been thinking about buying yet another tool which I could do exercise with for about a week and then give up like I usually do. but yeah, say again, that works with the Oculus where you are running through things and knocking them over and kind of having an exercise campaign. And I've actually got a friend called Scott Summit, I think you run into, Robin, who is a designer who's just got a patent for building a sort of virtual reality physical rehab rock climbing piece. And you can kind of see how you can put this in you can try to see the things that we don't do well. So physical rehab following strokes or hip replacement at home, which tends to be falling apart, especially now, right, when it's hard to get out, and who knows how long this COVID stuff will go on. You could see that kind of area as being something where we could really think about doing differently. Is there, how far is MindMaze, and just to pick the one you're working with, how far are they down the path of showing better outcomes and perhaps less readmission to the hospital and that kind of stuff? Is that?
Oh, they've been in 20 countries and 8,000 patients already. Like, they have proved it. They've been on the market for years. They've had FDA approval for about 2 years. They just hadn't come in here yet to start selling because they're selling all over Europe, parts of India. I think they've gone into Asia. They were just the company's based in Europe. That's why. But no. There's if you Google them, there's a huge number of white papers. Last I saw, there was over 75 that I'm aware of, but they've probably written a lot more since then. There's the data behind it. It works. It's better.
There's been I mean, that's obviously the thing. There's a lot of discussion. We talk about these new types of technologies, and let's sort of switch back, Deven, to your comment about telehealth. New things, which are either adding or subtracting from cost, but probably improving the patient experience at the least. There is even some question about some of these chronic care management tools, like the Livongos and Amadas and some of the others that, they all seem to be improving the patient experience a lot, which is something which I think sounds great. And we know that many aspects of healthcare, I mean, going obviously back to all kinds of patient compliance, that awful world, and adherence, especially with drugs and elsewhere, is, and what happens when the patient is not in the physician's office is a big problem. So I'm kind of wondering where we're going to be with tools like that, but also just tools with regular telehealth, in the next few months. So I guess this is my kind of question: is this a good time for healthcare systems, healthcare people who pay the bills for these things, to be allowing the introduction of these types of tools and reintroduction, or are we kind of going back to normal? So I've raised this before a bit, but I mean, where do we think we are on this? So, Deven, you mentioned telehealth, and you've been looking about this. Where do you think we are in the kind of, we've got to do things in a new way, and perhaps some of these new tools are going to make sense, versus we're going to head back to the way we always did it?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. My take on the reason why some of the, the sort of boom in telehealth is sort of flattening a bit, or maybe even going down a little bit, is that we forced everyone into telehealth due to COVID-19, right? We didn't think about, which are the types of services that are best suited for telehealth. We just said, none of y'all should be in any of these facilities, and we're just going to do telehealth visits for everybody. And it doesn't work for everything. And so I think we may be seeing in the data some adjustment as some facilities are have the capacity to start seeing patients live and in person, as we know a little bit more about precautions that we should be taking that can help protect people, and those are more fully deployed in some places. That there's a comfort, and frankly, in some places, just tiring of this pandemic and people throwing caution to the wind. But I think it's obviously there's multi-factors, but the fact that we were able to get the concessions around reimbursement, that there's a lot of sort of what we're hearing from the Hill about wanting to continue that. Like, I don't think we go back. I don't think we go back at all. I think there's going to be more of a kind of a level setting on, okay, which are the services that are really well suited for telehealth, and we make sure that those remain, but yet not suggesting that everything can be done by telehealth. I think sometimes patients just miss seeing people, frankly.
Well,
that I'd really rather
with
see my doc in person.
I agree with Deven, especially on things like, I'm not going to do my annual gynecology exam.
I didn't even think about that.
This is almost a family show, but I'm sure there's somebody who's following something like that online. There is the old Japanese joke about this, which is that Mrs. Yamasaki and Mrs. Sato and Mrs. And Mrs. Tanaka are all sitting there, and they're wondering where Mrs. Yamaguchi is, because they're all sitting there in the doctor's office, and they look around and they say, well, shouldn't she be here? And one of those, oh yeah, I've heard she's sick. She couldn't come. There's that sort of social aspect to go to the doctor's office. But, and I think what Deven's saying is that, I would love to go out for I don't need a haircut, but probably do need a haircut. I'd love to find something I could go to just for the sake of it. And I think there's a bit of a dip in that. But there's also, I think there's a directive that you can't, in the fee-for-service system, and, Ian, I love your opinion on this, there's a bunch of stuff you can kind of easily add on, which is harder to add on in telehealth. So I don't know. I mean, is that you hit sensing?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think Raj was on a couple of weeks ago when I was on, and he was saying that he's getting people coming back in to his clinic, and I think Deven nailed it. That what we've seen is a forcing function of COVID to stretch the limits of telehealth, right? And UCSF would say they went from 2% activity to 60, but they're back now at around 25, right? I mean, so all the data I've seen from people is there's been a bounce back to normalcy, but there's going to be a permanent effect. And I think we all agree that all the policy changes that were made in the short run and reimbursement changes should not be taken back. We want to support this, but it's a point we've made before, I think, that there are really two different ways to think about it. One is, are we just substituting, are we paving the cow path, right? I've made this point before, where we're just substituting a visit for an electronic visit, or are we digitizing care processes to have a much higher content of digital interventions rather than physical? Like I work a lot with Kaiser, and one of the things they're worried about is they've had an advantage in this over time. Does that advantage get reduced because everyone else has gotten smarter about the use of telehealth?
Well, it also needs to be the other Kaiser one is just the way they get paid for it and the way they can allocate resources. Right. And I've been asked this question a lot. I've been giving my spiel about the continuous clinic, which I bored the audience here with a few times, and I'll continue to bore them with until it actually happens in reality. But I think, that the organizations, and Kaiser is kind of one, and you could argue that maybe Amazon will become the 21st century version of that if they expand on what they're doing now with their new clinics, deal with crossover and the things, the resources they've got and the other stuff they've got. But you can imagine putting a lot of this, into the home, into other areas, and having many more people who get their care at home, like Robin, and get that, routinely dealt with than having to go to a facility. But it seems to me.
One other point, sorry, Matthew, just one other follow-on point though I think you were driving at, which I think totally agree with, is the money part of this is all about the ancillaries, right? I mean, it's the tests and the procedures and the stuff where the money is. And so, part of the incentive for the conventional delivery system is you can't do a lot of that stuff digitally, right? you have to do it in person.
But you could theoretically, if you built the system, I mean, some of it's tougher, but we're kind of getting there. So if you think about what Robin said about using virtual reality to do rehab, right? So you're now, that is a classic technology replacement. You don't need you don't need a physical therapist. All the people, you need to be in a place with a person, and now you can start to do that at home. Telehealth is some of that. We haven't done a great job, because it happened so quickly, haven't done a great job linking in the current sort of information systems in clinics and hospitals with the medical records and information into the telehealth systems. That's getting better. No, it's not getting better. Grace is saying, no, it's not.
No, it's a complete failure and a hot mess. No. Anyway,
okay.
Continue.
Let me rephrase what I said. There are people building tools that promise in the future to include more of that information, not have the telehealth with it be completely. So, but the other thing we haven't built into that, and COVID is damn necessary, is the remote monitoring, which is now slowly being introduced in its own CPT code into this. But you can start thinking about monitoring as being a big deal, because you can take heart data and pulse ox data and temperature data and blood glucose and whatever. And there are now, you have the Novongos and the others who are creating these ecosystems of sort of monitoring and putting the data into the cloud and coaching from it. And that's starting to evolve. And that's the story I've been trying to tell people with this continuous clinic. But Robin's going a step further, which is saying now we can start doing therapy, right? Doing stuff to people, remotely. And somehow we've got to, I would say, on my soapbox, we've got to shock the health system of thinking that this is the way that we can reduce costs, but also extend and expand care in a way we haven't done before. And by the way, there might be a little window with the current fascination in the world on dementia tests. Well, fascination by one particular person on his own dementia test. There are a whole bunch of companies who are doing things like, brain tests and doing analysis. I know you have NeuroTrack and you have Savonics and others who are kind of tracking activity in the brain over time and doing sort of both. And then you have Keeley Therapeutics, who've got a tool which sort of helps seniors resist dementia and that kind of stuff. That whole area, which is going to be very expensive for us, is an area where I think there's a role. I hate the term digital therapeutics, but there's a role for that as well. So, I think somehow this has to get the stuff that we're talking about here has to get from quote unquote the fringe players. I don't mean you're a fringe player, Robin, but the fringe to the mainstream, and people understand that. And it's hard to do it when they're worried about going bust because they haven't got heads in beds, sort of stuff. Trace, please.
I have a comment. So first of all, I think a lot of this is press release clickbait. All this first he went, look, telemedicine went up, and then no one's coming to the hospital, and then oh my God, telemedicine's going down. No, it's just the natural rhythm of what's happening, and no one's saying Apple's working from home. People are going back to the office. Now no one's working from home. Like, okay, let's take a deep breath. And if we're really interested in seeing what's happening here, we need to support people to live their best life, which is clearly going to be a combination of different things, depending on where you are in your healthcare journey, right? So now patients are going back to the hospital and everyone's freaking out that telemedicine's going down. Well, of course, because some people have to go. And, I don't believe in shocking the healthcare system and relying on them to get. I'm not surprised that hospitals aren't telling people about in-home infusions, because why would they want to do that? Where that's going to happen? We have to push from the bottom up and tell patients, and I say this all the time, I used to love having the privilege of going to conferences and speak at them and then go to the exhibit floor, because I was like, wow, there's so much amazing technology here, but I see none of it when I go back home to New York and New Jersey. We need to tell people about updating their medicine cabinet. Okay, you need a digital medicine cabinet. You need, the infrared thermometer, the pulse ox. I've told everybody about a pulse ox. I have so many people walk around with a pulse ox and a mask because they can't believe that you actually can breathe with the pulse ox and a mask, and everything their friends said on Facebook is a lie. If you, I mentioned something yesterday in a tweet in the Telemed Now chat about a personal ultrasound, and patients were like, personal ultrasound? It's expensive. However, there's so many technologies out there that people would invest in or will start pushing for, or maybe people would buy it and share it you know, for the consults or for the things. When there's a will, there's a way. And if you can get that info so people can hack the system together, I'm putting all of my chips on Pure Health support, getting this, forget the exhibit floors and conferences, that doesn't work. You need to go right out to the advocates and the engaged patients, because that good news will spread like wildfire. That's really my belief. That's how this is going to take up.
Wait, so Grace, maybe since everyone's doing like virtual events right now, you should run your own event right now for patients and tell them all the in-home things that they can do. Come to my session. It's 1 hour and it's only other, you know, cancer patients. And I'm just going to tell you the straight up truth about what you could do right now.
And I do. I mean, I don't do my own personal event, but that's what I do. I come and I write and I blog and I talk and I say, no, you need this, X, Y, and Z. That's the way to do it, 100%.
So, I mean, amazing and wonderful. I love doing that. And Grace, I'll support you doing a virtual event. I was just talking with somebody else about how I'm actually on a call tomorrow morning with a bunch of other event guys and gals, all about, you know, how are we going to fix the future of virtual events and what are we going to do? For those, some of them were not lucky enough to sell their events business a couple of years ago. So I've got the problem of what happened with that. You know, they've got the equivalent of people not going, you know, their revenue's gone. But you know, there's a big question: is how do we disseminate the information we do, and how do we reproduce the best part of those events, which usually sitting at the bar, having a cocktail and meeting people and discussing this kind of stuff, a bit the way we're doing it now, although we're a bit early for cocktails out here. But you know, I think that there's something to be said about getting into niches and, you know, and doing better education to the right people and trying to get people, peel people away. We've had a lot of, you know, haven't had Andrea Downing on the show yet. We've had a lot of problems about what the Facebooks and some of the bigger Twitter, I think, seems to be better. Well, there's a lot of toxic stuff on Twitter, but especially Facebook seems to be prevalent for a lot of disinformation about this, and we have to work hard about educating people better. But yeah, I think that. But we're also conscious that you've got a country now where, what is it, 25% of the people still believe that wearing a mask is bad for you. So we have some challenges there. Robin, I wanted to come back to you one last time. That was one company you mentioned, but before we leave you, you talked about a number of other things. What else are you optimistic about in terms of new types of technologies, interventions, therapies, you know, that you're looking at?
So I mentioned just briefly that I'm going on the advisory board of a new longevity company. So I work a lot in what's called the life extension world, which is curing cancer or, you know, getting some of the heart disease under control and tissue engineering. So this one is a medication, and they are planning on going out as a supplement. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what they do, though. So this is what it's going to do is clear what's called senescent cells. Senescent cells in your body are the dead cells, and you can also see them referred to as zombie cells. And what that means is they're no longer replicating, and so they're just junk. But the problem is they don't just die. They stand there on the sidelines and they're like yelling at all the other cells, creating inflammation. So what we want to do is get rid of these what's called senescent cells. And so this supplement will flush that out over a series of protocols. Mayo Clinic is doing some clinical trials around this same type of protocol that we are working on as well. Now, let me tell you, the co-founder, he's over 55, 60. I don't know exact age, but, you know,
That's
right
very,
around there.
very old, by the way.
Very old, very old. But, you know, he's got the kind of hairline that, you know, Matthew has. And one day, you know, he's taking his own protocol and testing it, and he's looking in the mirror and he's like, why do I have all these blackheads right here? And he was like, it's new hair. He was growing new black hair by clearing out the senescent cells from the adipose tissue, just the fatty tissue in your body. It literally grew new hair on him.
Well, that's how they're going to sell it. Dead easy.
Yeah, that's why. So yeah,
he's on the screen right away.
Exactly. Longevity, just get the hair going.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what they're going to do. So they are going to go direct to consumer in the supplement world as either an anti-balding or anti-longevity, or a pro-longevity type of treatment. But after they raise a lot of money to do that or have a lot of sales, they're going to start actual clinical trials around neurodegenerative disease as well as autoimmune disease.
I mean, do you, when you hit up those two aspects, right? I mentioned neuro testing and perhaps, reversing it using video games and what have you, which are now getting cleared. By the way, when you mentioned ultrasound, Grace, there's a new company called Caption, which has raised money. Caption Health just raised money last week, which is going to help non-techs, clinical professionals who are not techs, do accurate ultrasounds. And I think using things like the butterfly, the $2,000 ultrasound, you can imagine that maybe not for home use yet, but certainly things like nursing homes or other areas where you can imagine having this more of the trend of getting lower cost people, less skilled people that didn't do 4 years of medical school and 7 years of fellowship to actually start using some of these tools and getting good results out of them. I mean, but to go back to what you're saying, Robin, and I put in that big parentheses that I wanted to bring in earlier, going back to what you were saying, you've got this entire group there, Aubrey de Grey and God knows how many other people working on this idea of, can we extend life? Can we turn off the senescent cells? Can we make life better at the end of life and keep people from dementia and all the costs associated with it? We know we have an aging population. You look at some of the Asian countries like Japan and China, it's even worse. I'm actually working on a project now, looking for the EU and sort of technologies to help people with healthy aging over time. We have this thing coming down the path, as Ian has reminded us many times on this conference, on this podcast. We have very little money left, and we just spend a whole lot of money we haven't got, and probably going to spend more keeping the economy going during COVID. So that seems to me that there's a big opportunity there. So sort of forget the business opportunity for a second, which is huge if you could cure baldness or whatever, but what's the societal opportunity for improving that end of life care and and having people be more able to be self-reliant and cutting the cost of things like nursing homes and that kind of stuff?
That is huge to think about. I mean, I'm little over 29 now by a couple of decades, and I'm a severe chronic disease patient, but practicing longevity techniques, I am healthier than the average 25-year-old, right? And so it really, if I didn't have all these longevity techniques that I use and we didn't make progress like we have, I would probably be a shut-in and not able to leave bed, right? It changes the equation to make people productive members of society versus just drains on society because they're too sick to actually do anything else. It's a big deal.
How much of that, and I've seen you do some of the stuff you do with the yoga and the exercise and the meditation, but how much of that is sort of coming from internal, and how much of that could be made easily available to people to get on? So if you take a couple of, not to pull it out, but I suspect Ian's been known to call himself a Honda on some of his talks. What's a Honda, Ian?
Yeah, hypertensive, obese, non-compliant, diabetic, alcoholic.
How do we make it easy for Ian and anybody else on the call who might be an old man who's is the kind of things you're working on, are they coming in the next 5-10 years? Do we have to wait longer? What's your sense of how much that part of the healthcare system, which is still kind of on the fringe, makes an impact?
Well, it depends on what exactly you're talking about. I mean, stuff that I do are the stuff that we've been telling people to do for 20 years, right? I work out 7 days a week. I'm a vegetarian, and I do intermittent fasting, and I sleep 8 hours a night, and I have no stress in my life. Like everything you should be doing that we've been preaching, it really works. I mean, it crazily works to the point where, I'm 88 pounds and I can eat chocolate cake all day long if I want, right? Like I'm not gonna impact, my insulin because I don't do it all the time. I'm not gonna gain weight from it. You just literally have to lead that healthy life. And that one thing is going to add on 10 or 15 years to your life and make you feel better on a daily basis. You just have to get into the habits. It's not difficult, to figure out, but it's just hard to actually execute. Right?
It's back to we know what we need to do. It's just very hard to get us to do it.
Everyone wants to take the pill and lay on the couch and watch Netflix. And I'm like, you choose to want to do that. That's great. But medicine is never going to give you that silver platter where you're suddenly going to turn off all these other things and you can eat whatever you want and never work out. That's never going to exist. We're always going to have to do these other things to take care of your body. And the one thing I equate it to is like, okay, well, you have a marriage. You have to take care of your own finances and make sure you meet your bills. You take care of your car, you take care of your home. You got to put that kind of energy into taking care of this body. It doesn't work otherwise.
Right. Well, now you're disappointing me. I think optimism somewhere else. Oh, fantastic. No, and I agree. And I think, I'd actually be interested to see, and I wonder if anyone has any data on this, because of the impact of what people have been doing during COVID while the gyms have been closed. But I mean, I know I started bizarrely running just before COVID because the ski season, was a bad ski season. I'm still have to go out again tonight. It's painful and horrible. I hate it, but I'm still doing it. I wonder how long that kind of change, if people have been inspired by COVID, will happen and how many people have. I have a sense that things like running and some other forms of exercise and Peloton stock is going through the roof. I get a sense that people are trying to think about what they're doing a bit more. But on the other hand, we've got so much other stuff going on in society. Black Lives Matters, protests everywhere, and all the stuff happening. So I'm not sure the stress is going down overall. In fact, I know we know the mental health stress is definitely getting worse at the moment.
But there's stress, and then there is your reaction to stress. So you can't control events from happening. You can't control things that are, or the way other people's are reacting to you or acting towards you. You can only control your own emotional response. And so when dealing with huge stressors, like all of a sudden my biggest revenue stream, which is professional speaking, I was essentially fired overnight from like 15 different conferences, and that's my rent. I literally suddenly, bam, had no money coming in. I'm a single chronic disease patient in downtown Palo Alto. My bills are gigantic, right? You'd think I'd be like having a breakdown and super stressed out. But, I'm like, I'll get through this. Let's start these new things. I started a new company. I started to write a new book. Like, there are ways to get out of it. It was my reaction and my emotional reaction towards the stressful situation happening around me. That is it wasn't of my making. I have to deal with it, but it's my own reaction. And so it's all down to how are you reacting to the stress?
I think that's a big piece of it, but I think I want us to be careful about assuming that everyone can do what Robin has done. If I lived in a neighborhood where I could not run outside because I felt unsafe, and there were reasons for me feeling unsafe, then I couldn't do it. If there were the stress in my life was something that I did not feel empowered on my own to overcome, I don't want to be critical of somebody of not like pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, because I don't think that it's possible for everybody to do, although I give you huge credit for everything that you have overcome. And I think generally, like, being in charge of your own health is an important message, but I think we also have to be mindful that not to sort of assume that everyone is empowered to do all of those things, can actually eat healthy on the budget that they have, and be able to do so, because food is like love for people in terms of stressed out life. Like, do I want to eat a vegetable, or do I feel better, frankly, when I eat a Big Mac, even though I know it's bad for me, but it's easy. It's an easier way for me to feed my kids. And I personally feel better because it's like love. That's love food for me. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression, but you're both right, but also let's be careful not to sort of.
And as we wrap here, I mean, I'd agree. I think part of what we need to do, and Ian stressed this out, so he says, you've got to figure out where are people having most trouble with all different aspects of life, and you have to invest the resources there. And I think we know a lot about. I think one of the things that are going to come out of this COVID era is we know a lot about the stuff that we know we have not practiced, right? In terms of exercise, diet, education, stress, mental health, access, the list goes on and on and on. And the question is, are we going to take this opportunity to change some of this stuff and making sure that Robin's not an outlier, but everyday people get the support they do that. Looks like we're starting to do that in the mental health area, maybe. I'm hearing it talked a lot more about. I heard Chris Cuomo talking about it, and the other folks on CNN talking about their own personal issues with it. So, and getting care. But we've got a lot to change. All right, we are at the end, and we do a real quick wit round at the end here to sort of figure out what people are going to see next. So, what are you expecting in the next couple of weeks in?
We've got to make sure that we put something in place for low-income people. Otherwise, they're going to get evicted, and it's going to get even worse. And then the other thing is we've got to hope and pray that the hotspots that are actually starting to level off in Florida, Texas, Arizona. Hopefully, we can do that. If we can't, we're in for a real rough ride, I think.
Grace, what are you expecting next couple of weeks?
Looking forward to hearing more results on research on things that can help us medicine-wise or treatment-wise until we do get that vaccine. Because in all honesty, that's an iffy boat to sail on, and I'm hopeful about any kind of potent monoclonal antibodies that might be neutralizing, that could be a bridge, or more results on the convalescent plasma studies from recovered patients and how they can help us bridge some of these gaps.
Robin, what are you expecting just to hear in the next couple of weeks? Expecting to hear or to see?
Hoping that more people are actually adopting the mask, since we actually saw it come out of the White House. Yeah, and that actually making an impact.
And Deven, your forecast for the next couple of weeks?
Well, I'm keeping my eye on this data issue around data shifting from being reported to CDC from HHS, as I think a lot of people are, because the public should continue to demand the kind of transparency around this data that we deserve, and we might have to push harder for it.
Yeah, and I think I'd add a couple of things. I think there'll be more fuss around the next, as Ian mentioned, the next stimulus or rescue package, whatever you want to call it, from the Congress. There'll be a lot of fuss about that. I think we're now going to start waking up and hearing realizing there's an election coming as we get into August and get into the final weeks there. It's kind of been, and one of the things that's got to be in there is that there's now there's now a position paper out for the Democrats about what they're going to think about doing with healthcare in some of these other areas. Sanders and Biden kind of got their camps together and they've hashed some stuff out that's somewhere in the middle between their two policies. It seems to me that we're going to start finally thinking about what is next. We've done a lot of reacting. We're still in the middle of this thing with COVID, but I think for the next we're going to start thinking about, we have got to make some significant changes across all of our society. We're not going to get everything some people will want, but we clearly can't keep going the way we were. So that's my conclusion. And with that, I'm going to hopefully we get this right. Thank my great guest lineup today. We had an incredibly Bay Area Peninsula focused panel today. Robin Farmanfarmaian, special guest. Thanks so much for coming on, Robin. Hope to get you back on the THCB Gang from Palo Alto. Ian Morrison, all the way north, about a couple of miles north of her, from Menlo Park, and Deven McGraw hanging out. You're hanging out still in Mountain View, Deven, right?
No, I'm in San Francisco now.
Oh, you're about to say, okay.
I'm in the virtual reality office here. Yeah.
all the way north in San Francisco. That's right. Yes, you moved into my neighborhood. Now I've moved out, and I'm across the bridge up in Marin County. Grace Cordavano from Enlightening Results, keeping up the East Coast end of things there for from New Jersey. We'll hopefully have a more geographically diverse gang next week.
And follicular diversity too, right?
We'll see about that. Next, the same time, same place next week, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Of course, if you're listening to this on the podcast, you can hear it anytime, available on Spotify and on iTunes. It's Matthew Holt, THCB founder and publisher, signing off for this week's THCB Gang. Thanks so much.